Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome. I am here to report back on January's reading. For the month of January 2025, I asked you for prompts to do a kind of DIY readathon of one using only books that I already owned and hadn't read yet. So either books that are on my e-reader that I hadn't read yet, or books that are sitting on my physical shelf. I have one shelf in the house where all the unread books live. Those were my kind of domains of books to consider, and you all delivered a lot of prompts, and I managed to satisfy all of them by reading 8 books. So I want to share those 8 books with you, my thoughts on them, and then give a little hint of what my reading plan is for February. I will just say here that I don't necessarily plan on doing monthly reading recaps every single month. For 2024, I did, pretty consistently give an end of month recap, including reference to tarot practice, reference to kind of life update stuff, books that I had read, things that are on my wish list, a whole bunch of things in a kind of end of month recap. I'm not doing that for 2025. I want to give myself a lot of flexibility in terms of not locking into anything super routine. But where I feel like a month's reading is worth reporting on, for example, with a readathon, then I will totally share. And of course, I'll be sharing book reviews and thoughts on different books throughout the year as I feel inclined to do so. I also review on both Goodreads and Storygraph. I suspect I'll end up just on Storygraph in the near future, but right now I'm on Goodreads and Storygraph, posting the same reviews on both, and my links for those are below. If you would like to be Goodreads or Storygraph friends, please do add me. I'm happy to be friends and read each other's reviews on there. So I have 8 books to talk about from January. I pretty much stuck to the TBR that I had planned, which I shared here. I constructed in real time, which was actually a little bit less messy than I expected. I was quite pleased with how that went. I stuck pretty closely to it, except that I didn't get to one book, but that was okay because it ended up that another book actually satisfied the prompt. So these books will be familiar. 2 of the books I have here as hard copy, the rest are ebooks, so I'll put a little picture of the books up there. My January, I had a good reading month. I believe my average star rating for January was 4.1, so I'm happy with that. The first book that I will talk about is The Many Lives of the Multiverse, Worlds Without End. This is by Mary Jane Rubenstein, one of my favorites, based on a book that she wrote about pantheism, which is a very, very important book to me. So I was very excited to read this one. This was not my original pick for book with the longest title, which is one of the prompts that one of you shared with me. But then I realized that this entire piece on the front cover is actually considered to be part of the title. It's all there. So the full title of this book is Worlds Without End, The Many Lives of the Multiverse, in which are discussed pre, early, and postmodern multiple world cosmologies, the sundry arguments for and against them, the striking peculiarities of their adherents and detractors, the shifting boundaries of science, philosophy, and religion, and the stubbornly persistent question of whether creation has been designed, by Mary Jane Rubenstein. So this definitely satisfied the prompt of book with the longest title of any book on my TBR. I chose it as well because it satisfied the prompt that someone provided, a book about alternate timelines. I didn't know for sure if I had any fiction that was like alternate history or timeline jumping in any particular way. So I went a nonfiction route because I was committed to not buying any books for this. I did buy books in January. I did buy books in January, but for the readathon that we're talking about here, that I did with all of these prompts, I did only stick to books that I had. So, The Many Lives of the Multiverse. I really enjoyed this. I'm also, happy to admit that some of it went right over my head. The book covers, as its title suggests, different kind of theories of multiverse cosmology, going back to ancient philosophy. The first chapter talks about, for example, Plato and Aristotle. Ptolemy is represented. So going back quite far. And throughout the book, it's kind of chronological. It goes through the Stoics, Thomas Aquinas, Nicholas of Cusa, Giordano Bruno, Immanuel Kant, and forward into kind of contemporary physics as well. I was much more confident that I was understanding the theories being described in this book when the focus was on ancient philosophy. Having a background in philosophy, and I minored in philosophy in undergrad and did a fairly philosophy-heavy graduate school trajectory, the ancient philosophy is just much more in my area of comfort zone. Plato, I know Plato, I've read lots of Plato multiple times in many instances. The contemporary scientists, not so much. But I think that Rubinstein explains the different arguments, in as comprehensible of a language as is kind of possible, if that makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can thoroughly explain the cosmic microwave background and what that means. But reading about it, I had a sense of what it was at the time of reading. So, really interesting, really interesting in terms of the kind of implications of multiverse cosmology and the relationship between theories about the possibility of multiverse or multiverse cosmology and the relationship of those to the idea of creationism, basically, or theories of creationism, ideas of creationism. Lots of discussion about the Big Bang and the idea that the Big Bang theory doesn't really tell us about the bang, if there is one, so much as model up to the moment just after that, that might have occurred or did occur in some sort of a way. Really interesting, really dense. Really dense. But I really enjoyed it. The next book that I will share with you is The Magic of the Iron Pentacle, Reclaiming Sex, Pride, Self-Power, and Passion by Jane Meredith and Gide Parma. This is a book that I chose to satisfy 3 different prompts that viewers shared for me to make a readathon with in January. This book is a book with a monochromatic cover. It's not perfectly monochrome, but it is all blue, so that's the best I could do with the books that I had. It is a book by a witch, or in this case by 2 witches because it's co-authored, and I'm calling it a book that I hope surprises me, which is a very interesting prompt that I could apply to almost any book. I'm always hoping, like, this is the 5-star book that I never expected, a book that I hope surprises me. And this is a book that is based on a core class in the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft. Iron Pentacle is one of several classes. The first one is Elements of Magic. There's also a book based on Elements of Magic edited by Jane Meredith and Gide Parma, but with contributions by a bunch of different folks, whereas this one is just written by the 2 of them exclusively. which made it a more cohesive and consistent read, I would say. There's also Pearl Pentacle is another class, and Pearl Pentacle, there's a book coming out in early March, I believe, right on my birthday. So that's going to be a birthday treat, birthday gift list item. I have not taken Iron Pentacle class. Elements I have taken with teachers, and I read the Elements book at the time I was doing the course. So this was a bit of a different experience, not having done Pentacle work before and not having teachers to engage with in that process. But effectively, just very briefly, the Pentacle of iron with these 5 points and an order from sex down to pride to self to power and to passion and then back up again maps onto the body in terms of the head, the hands, and the feet. And there are suggestions at the end of the book around how to work with this tool in terms of, reflecting on and exploring, meditating on, thinking about clearing blockages related to these different points, related to doing kind of energy working with these different points, working with this pentacle tool in a group with maybe a person at each point, and so on. So most of the book is organized in terms of chapters, one for each point. So for example, for self, you will have a section including an introduction to what self refers to. There's a memoir section from Jane Meredith. There's a discussion of kind of the concept of self in kind of philosophic context. There is a meditation related to self. There's an exercise to try or a ritual to try. And then there's a memoir section by Gide Parma for self. There's another kind of reflection process. There's a trance activity and so on. So you get these kind of sections for each of the 5 points. And it's only at the end that it really brings together how to work with the pentacle as a whole. As someone new to pentacle work, I would have liked if that was actually front loaded in the book rather than put it at the end. But they do tell you at the very beginning, the end of the book has all of this material in it, so you know that it's coming. I didn't read this perfectly in order. I did read all of it. The ending also includes some very basic ritual stuff around circle casting and grounding and these kinds of things that those of us who have had some sort of craft practice for longer will have ways of doing ourselves that may or may not look exactly like this, but they're there if someone stumbled on this as their first witchcraft book, which I would not suggest. Those basics are provided, and they're provided in a good way, and the book reads as inclusive, and I liked a lot about it. So definitely liked and definitely want to pick up Pearl Pentacle as well. Very much so. The third book that I will talk about, and from here on out it's fiction and it's ebooks that I read. I read A Snake Lies Waiting by Jin Young, and this has been a book that has been on my e-reader for possibly over a year. It is, of course, not a new release or anything. And this one I chose to satisfy 3 different prompts that were suggested to me by lovely viewers. And those prompts were the 3rd book in a series that I've started. And A Snake Lies Waiting is 3rd in Legend of the Condor Heroes out of 4. This was a series that was published kind of serially in kind of a magazine form when it was initially published. So there's a degree of arbitrariness in terms of the 4 books that comprise the English translation, but this is the 3rd of 4. It is a translated book, which is another prompt. And it satisfies the prompt, a book about a lie, intrigue, or deception. I feel like this entire book is lies, intrigues, and deceptions, some of which are really unbelievable, and there's really every kind of deception in this book, like planting and springing booby traps and pretending that someone is dead who isn't, and hiding and eavesdropping and kind of every kind of lie, intrigue, or deception that you could possibly think of is included in A Snake Lies Waiting. I really, really enjoyed this book. I really liked The Legend of the Condor Heroes a lot. I found parts of this like laugh out loud funny, actually. I don't know that it's my favorite installment of the 3 that I've now read. Parts of it were quite not slow moving, because wuxia is not slow moving, but very kind of contained, because they would be in one quite small setting for a very, very, very long time. There were parts of it that read kind of cramped, for lack of better language. But of course I'm going to pick up the 4th book at some point and finish the series. I think that these are great. Definitely do not start with A Snake Lies Waiting. Even if you're in the mood for a book about a lie, intrigue, and deception, please do not pick this up if you have not read the first 2. Because these books that comprise The Legend of the Condor Heroes really, they just pick up right where the previous one left off. They would be completely incomprehensible in terms of the plot if you hadn't read the book prior. So start with the first one. The next novel that I will talk about, and this is not the order that I read them or anything, it's just the order that I made notes. I read Babel 17 by Samuel Delany. And this one also satisfies 3 different prompts. This is the book that I owned, as far as I could tell. I didn't look up every single person, but as far as I could tell, this is the book that I owned with the oldest living author. Samuel Delany is 82 at the time that I'm recording. And I did, look up a number of authors whose books I had who I thought might be the oldest. And there was even one other person who was also 82, but who was a younger 82 than Samuel Delany. So the oldest living author, a book by an author who inspires me because it's Samuel Delany. His autobiographical writing I find really interesting and inspiring. His work as a early author writing queer and diverse speculative fiction inspires me. His work as a critic inspires me. I got to go during kind of the most intense of the lockdown time. I got to go to a Zoom call with him, and it was, a kind of conversation. He was being kind of interviewed about some of his more recent work, and I really, really enjoyed that. Samuel Delany is incredible. And finally, I chose Babel 17 as a book that is poetic. I didn't have any poetry on my unread books selection to pick from, and I don't read a ton of poetry, but Samuel Delany's writing is certainly poetic, and in Babel 17, the main character really is a poet, and is a poet who is called upon to help with what is initially thought to be a kind of cryptography puzzle, trying to figure out, what is this alien cipher that turns out to actually not be a cipher or a code at all, but a language with very particular sorts of implications in the book. So if you're into the kinds of science fiction that explore language, and there's some amazing science fiction that explores language, right? Ted Chiang's story that became the film Arrival is an excellent example, or China Miéville's Embassy Town is another. Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness is not really about language, but it does some really interesting things with language. There's lots of science fiction that plays with language in really interesting ways, and Babel 17 is absolutely one of those. So, I found it exciting, especially towards the end. There's a lot of twists. Definitely recommend Babel 17. And it wouldn't be a bad place to start if you have never read Samuel Delany's fiction before. I would say it actually is one of the more approachable ones that I've read. Like, I wouldn't start with Dahlgren, for example, but Babel 17 or Nova, those would be places that I would start for Samuel Delany's fiction specifically. I read Party of Fools by Cedar MacLeod. People will know Cedar MacLeod as the author of the Eternal Library series, as well as, of course, the creator of the Numinous Tarot, the Threadbound Oracle, the Uncertain Oracle. They recently did a tarot, I think, a tarot that's food-based, creator of a number of different decks. And Party of Fools is a novella in a series. It's the first, and I think it's the only one published at this point. There might be one more, I'm not sure. A series that's food focused or food themed, has strong food themes. So I chose Party of Fools to satisfy 4 prompts. This was the one that made the most prompts, actually. Party of Fools I chose for the prompt that one of you provided about picking a book whose genre is humor. It's very explicitly marketed as comedic. A book with a neurodivergent character. This is also, very front and center in the plot and in the marketing and framing of the book as well. A book by a disabled author. Cedar McLeod identifies as and is open about being disabled. There's a couple of books on my list that could have satisfied this as well. Samuel Delaney as well would satisfy that prompt. Samuel Delaney is dyslexic, and he's talked and written about that a fair amount. And also Party of Fools satisfies the prompt of a protagonist over the age of 50. And Party of Fools is a fantasy novella, so there are some very long lifespans represented, much longer than a human lifespan in the non-fantastical world could be, right? We're talking in terms of centuries. So one of the characters, several actually, but one of the main ones is quite a ways over 50. This was a fun one. I will say that I didn't love Party of Fools quite as much as I'm enjoying Cedar McLeod's other series about the magical library. I feel like if you are a reader who enjoys things like the Travis Baldree books, Bookshops and Bone Dust and Legends and Lattes, or these kind of low stakes, cozy, fantasy type genre, that you should read Party of Fools. I keep trying. I keep trying with this kinds of book, and they're just not 100% usually what I'm looking for. But I enjoyed it. It was fun. Of course, Cedar McLeod's books are always, really meaningfully diverse and inclusive, and it's a fun book. It's definitely, very lighthearted and a fun read. So do check it out, and check out Cedar's other work as well. I read The Barrow Will Send What It May by Margaret Killjoy. This is another novella. And The Barrow Will Send What It May is a sequel. And it is one that I do not suggest reading first. So I'll just put that front and center. And the reason that I picked The Barrow Will Send What It May in terms of prompts is a own voices book set in a rural area. That was one of the prompts. So Margaret Killjoy is a author who lives in the United States and who lives in the Appalachian region specifically, so lives rurally. And these books follow Danielle Kane. The book series is called Danielle Kane Book Series, and friends in a kind of not quite post-apocalyptic, but kind of, futuristic context set in the United States, mostly in rural settings. They're traveling around a lot in both the first book and this one. And at this point, they've become kind of supernatural detective demon hunter type crew. So without spoiling too much, that's the direction that the plot goes. They definitely have horror elements. I wouldn't describe The Barrow Will Send What It May as fundamentally a horror book, but there's definitely aspects of that. And the first book was more scary than the second one, I would say. It's more of a scary fantasy, maybe, would be a better descriptor than pure horror. Very diverse cast, very inclusive, very well written in this respect as well. I find these books really fun. They're very explicitly kind of anarchist in their inclination and in ways that I really appreciate. So Margaret Killjoy's fiction is really fun, and I would suggest checking it out. I just finished the last book chronologically that I finished in January was an anthology that I actually backed on Kickstarter. I have not been backing many decks on Kickstarter of late, and I haven't really even been enjoying browsing on Kickstarter, to be completely honest, but I've been finding books on there, books and magazines. I think I'm only a super backer on Kickstarter because of books and magazines. And this is one of those books, an anthology called To Root Somewhere Beautiful, edited by Lauren T. Davila. And this one satisfies two prompts as best as I could with the books that I had. One is a book where plants figure prominently. To Root Somewhere Beautiful is an anthology of reclamation. It is a book of short stories about nature fighting back against humans who have harmed it so severely, right? Mother Nature fighting back in different kinds of ways. And every single short story isn't necessarily really plant forward, but a lot of them are. A lot of them involve plants growing over buildings and people and things like this, right? So it's definitely one that satisfies this prompt of plants figure prominently. I also got the prompt from one of you about a book by a Latin American author, and I, embarrassingly, did not have a book on my unread list that I could think of for sure by a Latin American author, but this one has a Latin American editor and also has a number of contributors because it's an anthology with lots of different authors. A number of those authors are Latin American folks as well. All their bios are in the book and I think on the Kickstarter as well. So that is, a book including work by multiple Latin American authors for that prompt. This was good. I feel like inevitably with a collection like this, there's going to be kind of hits and misses or stories that one likes more than others. But overall, I think I only rated one story less than a 3.5, maybe. And there's quite a lot of stories. I kind of rated each story out of 5 stars just for myself. Like, I'm not going to publish all of those ratings individually, obviously, but just for myself to kind of keep track. So I'd say it was a strong anthology overall. It didn't feel repetitive, even though the theme was stuck to really closely, which I appreciated. It was pretty wide-reaching in terms of genre. I almost expected more horror out of this, actually. There were a few stories that definitely leaned hard into horror, but a lot of them I would say were more dystopian and not necessarily horror completely. There were some stories that I really, really liked in this one. It can be hard to read these kind of collections in the context of observing in real time the scariness of climate change and human-caused climate change and environmental destruction and every day witnessing that, in my own backyard in different kinds of ways. These kinds of collections are really challenging, but also I think really important. And so I would suggest this collection for sure. Finally, I had an advanced copy, so I got to read, before others, The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. And this is horror. This is fucking horrifying horror. The Buffalo Hunter. And I picked this one on the basis of it being something that satisfies 2 prompts. Fiction not written in third person. And a book where the main character is a villain. And it definitely satisfied those. It's hard with a prompt like the main character is a villain to necessarily know ahead of time when you obviously haven't read the book yet. But knowing that this book draws on an actual historical incident of settler colonial violence, and knowing that one of the main characters is a priest, I just figured that there would be some main character villainy in this book, and was I ever right? It, again, is not written in third person. A lot of this is, I don't know if it would be properly called epistolary, because it's not letters, but it's kind of, it has a frame of a descendant of the priest reading the diaries of the priest character. So there's kind of two timelines going on. The contemporary one that you get at the very beginning and the very end of the novel, and then the whole middle section of the novel being the historic accounts. And it is a kind of vampire book of sorts. I really, really like. I gave this 5 stars. I have read Stephen Graham Jones before. He is the kind of horror author that I sometimes struggle to read his work before bed. I think that he's a really brilliant author. I absolutely will read more of his work. I find his work challenging. Definitely not for those who are more squeamish, for those who might struggle with body horror or gore or death of animals, like things like this. I would say steer clear. It's quite graphic and it's quite violent. So good. This book was I couldn't stop thinking about this book. And I would be reading it and kind of exclaiming aloud to my partner who would be in the room with me while I'm reading, like, what the fuck? What? Oh, that I cannot even say without giving too many spoilers. I would go into this reading as few spoilers as you possibly can, knowing that with this one the content warnings are heavy. Oh my goodness, it's scary. And so good. I thought it was so good. This was the best book of the month for me, for sure. The Buffalo Hunter. So that was my month. Thank you all for giving me so many prompts. I'm quite pleased with myself that I managed to actually satisfy all of these. And then in the process, I read 8 books from my TBR that I had already purchased, which is amazing. And I only bought 3 books in January, so it was like my pile / folder, because some of them are digital, of unread books actually shrunk by 5. Well done, me. Thank you so much again for all of your help with this. I had so much fun. Now, reading for February. February, for a number of years now, I've participated in Blackathon, a readathon for, of course, Black History Month, which is February. I do not know if Blackathon is happening this year. I'm just not sure if the host is going to be creating prompts this year. So I will hang out here patiently and see, and if Blackathon happens this year, I will totally be participating. But whether it does or whether it doesn't, I will be reading books by Black authors from around the world for celebrating Black History Month, February. I have 2 books from my physical bookshelf that I plan to read for February, which are both, of course, by Black authors. One is a tarot book, and that is Tarot for the Hard Work by Maria Minnis. I have had this book pretty much since it came out, and I know that it's one that's going to involve a lot of kind of journaling and writing exercises and things, and I want to give it a good amount of time. I'm really excited to read this one. So this is on my list for February. I also got, as a holiday gift from my mom, a book that I asked for, that I've been waiting for it to come out, and that is Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Alexis Pauline Gumbs is the author of Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons of Marine Mammals, which is a book that I love, and I plan at some point this year to reread Undrowned. It's a really powerful book, really, really incredible. And Audre Lorde, of course, is Audre Lorde. I need to give no description or introduction of Audre Lorde. Massively important Black feminist thinker, essayist, poet. Audre Lorde. And this book focuses, I think, more so on Lorde's poems and her archive than her essays. So I've read Lorde's essays, the collection Sister Outsiders, kind of the best known essay collection. I've read that before. I haven't read a lot of her poetry. So I'm going to read this, and if I feel so inclined, I'll pick up one of Audre Lorde's other books that I haven't already read and read that afterwards as well. So I have those for February. And I also have an advance copy of a new novella by Nnedi Okorafor called One Way Witch, which is a sequel. It's a novella that is part of a trilogy. It's the second book in a trilogy, of which I've, of course, already read the first. So that is what is queued up on my e-reader. I'm looking forward to a fabulous February of reading. If you're reading anything in particular for February, particularly in celebration and honoring of Black History Month, do let me know in the comments below. And I will see you all again soon. Thanks for watching.